Well, even though November started off chilly, warmer weather with temperatures in the 60s arrived this week. And coming up in that WTOL 11 10-day forecast, as we look ahead towards next week, milder than normal conditions will return. Hard to believe we're already in the middle of November. Meteorologist John Burchfield here, and we're going to be talking a late November warm up that could bring those temperatures well above average for the next 7 to 14 days. Thanks for subscribing to that Climate Friday newsletter. Good to have you here, whether it's on WTOL.com, YouTube, or on any of our streaming services. You can subscribe at WTOL.com/email. Let's start to break down the data and look ahead towards November, the rest of the month, and the role that climate change is playing in our November temperatures. First and foremost, want to recap the month of October and look back before we look forward. When all was said and done, October ended with a 56-degree average temperature. Now that we're looking back at the weather record books, that put October as 1.4 degrees above average, and that's a trend that has become more prevalent due to climate change. That 56-degree number, that includes the overnight lows as well as the daytime highs. Our average high temperature, that is just during the peak of the afternoon, was 65 degrees, and that number was also above average. And when you look at the mean temperature, or factoring in the highs and the lows, 56 degrees. No matter how you look at it, October was a warmer than normal month, and November could likely end that way as we look ahead towards the next several weeks. Not only in Toledo, but also globally, it was actually the warmest on record, and those weather records go back about 150 years now. We were 1.6 degrees above average, and that is compared to what we call the pre-industrial average, which is a snapshot at what temperatures looked like before the widespread industrial revolution that brought lots of emissions and CO2. And that goes back to the 1850s to near 1900. That's how long weather observations have been taken. October globally was 1.7 above average, and that trend was also experienced here at home in Toledo and Northwest Ohio. So how has October, November, and autumn weather in general changed over the years? Well, when we compare a typical month, we're starting to see more warm months and fewer cold months. Back in the 1980s and 90s, there were more commonplace colder than average months. You'll notice some of those went 1 degree below average, some of them half a degree below average, but overall the trajectory is headed up. And as we just experienced this year, some of those October weather can bring temperatures 1 to 2 degrees above average. So in other words, those warmer anomalies becoming more commonplace and the cold anomalies becoming less commonplace. Of course, there is some year-to-year fluctuation due to the jet stream and shifts in the weather pattern, but overall the uptick is undeniable. Not only is the magnitude becoming more frequent, but also we're looking at more common and more frequent warm fall days. In Toledo, we are seeing 15 more above average fall days than we did half a century ago. This graph goes from the 2020s all the way back towards the 1970s. So we're seeing more frequent, more common warm fall days, and 15 is actually pretty sizable when you're just looking at the fall season. Fall warming has impacted the entire contiguous United States. However, if I had to pinpoint where it's affected the most, if you look at the southwestern United States, those darker colors indicate where temperatures have risen the most on this color key. That shows you 3.5 to 4 degrees of warming since the 1970s. Across the country's center portion, and that includes the Great Lakes and the Midwest region, yes, we have experienced a warming trend, but not nearly as pronounced as some of those western states have felt. So let's look at some data that shows those last 50 years or so and what the thermometers have told us. Looking at 241 cities across the country, which is a pretty good sample size, a pretty widespread look at those temperatures, 96% of them have seen a warming trend since 1970. That amounts to 232 out of the 241 cities that were studied. So just about every single one has warmed up since the 1970s. Average of those cities was 2.4 degrees of warming, which is pretty significant when you think about that's only half a century and we're warming up 2 to 3 degrees. Now, some of those cities on the most extreme end of the spectrum warmed up over 7 degrees, and of those 241, it was Reno, Nevada that actually warmed up the most due to climate change, 7.7 degrees warmer than it was half a century ago. Overall, the biggest warming trend occurring in the southwestern United States, but it's still something that we have felt very closely here in the Midwest. So even though we did have a chilly Halloween and start to the month of November, what can you expect going forward into the middle of the month. Well, late next week, we are expecting the return of some warmer weather. Yes, this weekend is going to be bright, but it's still going to be a little cooler than average. Late next week, we are going to climb to the 60s with an overall uptick in temperatures that is expected as we notice what we call a ridge in the jet stream that'll usher in milder than normal conditions, not only for Michigan and Ohio, but also much of the eastern and central portions of the United States. A big warm up next week that'll lift those temperatures as much as 10 degrees above average. The long range outlook, this map shows you through November 22nd, which could even kick off the week of Thanksgiving, that is going to feature milder than normal conditions. And the red colors on that map show you above average temperatures. And you'll notice from Minnesota and Wisconsin all the way back towards the Great Lakes, the East Coast, everybody on that map is expected to experience milder than normal conditions for the next 2 weeks or so. Now, of course, warm and mild are very relative this time of year. In our normal high temperature, well, if you're watching this on November 10th, Friday, that means 54 is our average high. So, of course, when that's normal and we hit 60 degrees, yes, technically that is milder than normal, but it might not feel so warm from your perspective due to the fact that we have to readjust our expectations as we round the corner into mid to eventually late November. Thanksgiving, our average high temperature is going to be 48, so we're going to continue to drop as we head towards the latter half of November, and that means that what we consider mild and warm, it's all based on that average. So climate change is causing our average to rise. However, it's still going to feel chilly on average as we look towards the rest of November. November as a whole is a month that is getting much warmer, not just here at home, but also across the globe, and that is a trend that has become incredibly pronounced. And we're looking at Novembers that have been warmer than average consistently, time and time again. In fact, we have gone 46 straight Novembers that are all warmer than average across the globe. For some of you, your entire lifetime, November has been warmer than normal. When you look at all months added up and tallied up, 536 consecutive months globally, looking at global temperature data that are warmer than the 20th century average. And this November, very likely to tally and add to that list of not only warm consecutive months, but also warmer than normal Novembers. So what can you expect for the rest of November? Likely to be milder than average as we usher in a shift in the weather pattern. Regardless of what the rest of November has in store, you can stay tuned to the Climate Friday newsletter for the latest in next week's edition. And you can subscribe there, by the way. In next week's edition, we'll be talking about Thanksgiving and an early look ahead to what you can expect, and also some extremes from past years. What's the most snow we've gotten on Thanksgiving? How about the warmest temperature? We'll break down that Thanksgiving climatology and a look ahead towards the latter half of November coming up next Friday.